Hi math students, this is our introduction video for our lesson on independent and dependent variables. In this lesson, we're really going to focus on if you have a story with two variables, two things we don't know in it, being able to identify which is the independent variable and which is the dependent variable, because you can use that to help you do a lot of important things in this unit, like create equations, tables, and graphs. We are going to start with definitions for each of these. Your independent variable is the variable we can control or change, and the dependent variable is the variable that's affected. When I think about independent and dependent variables, these are some of the ways I think of them. Independent variable, that's going to be what changes first, and it impacts the dependent variable. So the dependent variable is what happens second. You can also think of it with cause and effect. The independent variable is the cause, and it affects the dependent variable. You can also use the word depends. The dependent variable depends on the independent variable. So these are the definitions we are going to use to help us identify which variable is which. I'm going to give you a story as an example. For example, Louise reads for 10 minutes each day. The equation T equals 10D represents the total amount of time he reads. T represents the total number of minutes read, and D represents the number of days read. The very first thing we're going to do with this story is identify what the independent and dependent variables are. There are two variables, the total number of minutes read and the number of days he reads. We are trying to figure out which one is independent and which one is dependent. You can think of it with cause and effect. You can think about it as which one does he change first because it impacts the other one. You can think about it with depends on, using those words. But go ahead, pause the video and see if you can identify which one is independent and which one is dependent. So the answer for that question, the total number of minutes read, that is our dependent variable. And the number of days he reads, that is our independent variable. Going through the different ways you can think of it, the number of days he reads, that's what he has control over. That's the cause. He can control how many days he reads, and it impacts or affects the total number of minutes he reads. We could also say the sentence, the total number of minutes read depends on how many days he reads, or the number of days he reads. Using those words depends on, I really like using those to help explain. The total amount of time he reads depends on how many days he reads. Being able to identify independent and dependent variables is going to be important for a lot of the math we do in the next future lessons. One of the reasons we need to know these is because when you make a table from a story, there's an order you create your table. The first part of your table is always going to be your independent variable, and the second row in your table is always going to be the dependent variable. So for example, in this story, our independent variable is the number of days he reads, and the dependent variable is the total number of minutes read. We know he reads for 10 minutes each day. So if I wanted to make a table, I could say, well, if he reads for 0 days, he reads for a total of 0 minutes. If he reads for 1 day, he reads for a total of 10 minutes. What about 2 days? 2 days is 20 minutes. 3 days, 30 minutes, and so on. Our equation says you're multiplying 10 by D, 10 by the number of days. So every single time I put a number here, like 5 days, I'm doing 10 times 5 to figure out how many total minutes that is. So one reason we want to know our independent and dependent variable is because when you make tables for stories, which we're going to do a lot in this unit, independent variable always is first, dependent variable is always second. The other thing we're going to do a lot in this unit is create graphs. And just like the table, there's a reason we want to know independent and dependent variable. When you create a graph, your x-axis, that's the number that goes sideways, that is where you always put your independent variable. And your y-axis, the one that goes up and down, that is where you always put your dependent variable. So if I wanted to make a graph for this story, my x-axis, that's going to be D, and we can label it as number of days. And then my y-axis, that would be T, and we could label it the total minutes. So the other thing we're going to be doing a lot in this unit is creating graphs to go with these stories. For example, that first point would be right here, because if he reads for 0 days, that's 0 minutes. But for day 1, I'm going to do every other line, 2, 3, 4, 5. For day 1, we know he's read 10 minutes. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. I could say after 1 day, he's read 10 minutes and put a point there. After 2 days, he reads 20 minutes. 3 days, 30 minutes. And keep putting those points that we already have over here in our table to help us graph and create a line of the story. We're going to spend a couple lessons working on making tables and graphs. The most important part from this video is knowing your independent and dependent variables, and that in a table, independent variable is always first, dependent is second, and on a graph, independent variable is always down here on your x-axis, and dependent is on your y-axis. We're going to do more work like this in today's lesson, and you are all ready to go. Thanks so much for watching.